Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Draft Room. This is the NFL Draft podcast of the Packernet Podcast Network. If you'd like to call in, 608-561-3243 is the number to do so. Feel free to drop any questions, comments, concerns, mocks, favorites, prospects, whatever it is you got. Let's talk about it. Speaking of, we do have Garrett from Southern Illinois. What's going on, dude?
Hey, Ryan. This is Garrett from Southern Illinois. I have a question regarding when it comes to a team for the NFL, how do they use the newest technology that is now becoming available when when you can apply AI, all the logistics that a computer now can do? You see commercials where guys are sitting on the sideline and they say, give me this linebacker and such, and they start narrowing down the guy that they want. And I was just wondering if you're going to use a pie chart, for instance, what would be the percentage that a team may rely on AI? How much do they rely on the combine numbers? How much do they rely on their scouting team? And then their draft need versus what they want in a player. I'm just curious what you think. If you're going to do it, how would you break it down to percentages of what a team would rely on when it comes to their information? Thanks.
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit yesterday. I have no idea what podcast it was on, honestly. It could have been any of them. But in regards to the combine, I think it was on the regular Packernet one because it was talking about Brian Gutekunst's, some of his comments. But in regard to the the 40 time and stuff, and you know, we hear them say this every single year. It's the same thing they have to keep telling us. You know, it's nice that they run and they do all that. That's all great, but we're kind of just here for the medicals in the interviews. And I think we just choose not to believe them. Like, yeah, right, you know, whatever. But he went on to kind of elaborate a little bit that I thought was kind of important, and that he was talking about how, you know, now with technology like GPS that they have available, they have the ability now to track a player's speed. So they have all these different games that they can watch. They've watched them in person. They have all the All-22. They have, I'm sure, all kinds of crazy software and everything else that they can use where they can, similar to what you're talking about, probably not necessarily AI, but maybe they could integrate that in to streamline some stuff. You know, you can pull up a player, find third down, find short yardage, find whatever you want to look for. And then you can use GPS data to track the speed. And it's not just one number for speed. I'm sure they have dozens of speed metrics that they're looking at. You know, speed through contact, speed coming out of the break, speed off the line, acceleration, speed at certain distances, and all these different things that tell you different data points about this player's speed. Not just the one number, but the full picture of their speed profile, I guess you could say. Even you know, down the stretch of a game, you know, are they starting to get tired or whatever? I don't know what all they look at, but the amount of things they can look at using technology, I'll say, rather than specifically AI, is incredible, and it's getting better, and teams are certainly embracing it. And so when you look at the 40-yard dash, they couldn't give a crap about the 40-yard dash. If a guy, they looked at, let's say, a dozen games for a prospect, and they came to the conclusion that this guy, let's go the more complicated route. They came to the conclusion that he's slow and then he runs fast. Faster than they anticipated. As I've said before, because they've said it before, at best what that does is make them go back to the drawing board. But at the end of the day, if they had no data that pointed them to that, what that means is, you know, if he trains specifically for an event, that event basically doesn't correlate to the NFL whatsoever. There's no situation where you're, you know, wearing those clothes and in that position and you fire off in a straight line unabated. Like, none of those things correlate to the NFL and what you do in the NFL. You're in a standing position. You have a person directly in front of you, and so the position your body's in, what you do with your feet, and then you have to fight through contact, all these different things. Like it just doesn't correlate. And so yeah, if you can run fast in a straight line there, that's great. But we've watched dozens, hundreds of plays, maybe thousands, I don't know, of plays from this player in dozens of games. And you never showed that you can play with speed. Why do I give a crap that you ran a fast 40? You don't play fast. So, I think AI it's good and it's bad. When I think of stuff like AI, I tend to kind of just take it on a straight line out into infinity. Like, what if this just keeps getting better and better and better and better and better? What does that look like? Eventually, it's going to get to the point where a lot of this work kind of gets done for them. I don't know what kind of technology they have. I know that if somebody worked hard enough, they could create something that does this. Because I know they already have tracking technology. I've downloaded one for free on my computer. It's terrible, but I'm sure there's much better solutions where you can select something on a video and it will track that person, and then it'll track the miles per hour and do all these different things. Eventually, we will get to a point where you can upload an MP4, and it will just output the data for you. It'll understand the down and distance. It will be able to automatically identify the markers on the field, so you won't have to manually say, okay, this is from this distance to this distance, is 5 yards, and then do the angles and all that. So it'll do that already. And again, it's very possible this already exists, because it wouldn't be that hard to do just to create an NFL solution that does this. But it can track all the different players, do their best to identify their numbers and, kind of understand who the different positions are based on, the height, all the characteristics that a scout could use to say, okay, that's the prospect right there, to know which player is which and kind of keep that straight. But it'll be able to identify all the different things, the speed, all these different metrics. And what that ultimately does is increase efficiency and accuracy. I mean, accuracy comes with efficiency. You only have so much time in a day. So if you can do 10 things and then suddenly you can do 100 things, you're significantly more efficient, meaning you get more things done, meaning you get more data and you get to be more accurate. Presumably, unless it's bad data, but whatever. The biggest downside is that you get to the point where essentially scouting and all that stuff is kind of useless, because all 32 teams are nearly exactly identical in the data that they have. There might be variables based on team needs, but otherwise everybody has. I mean, it's pretty close already to guys having, because you're using the same process or whatever. But those inefficiencies will create and personalities, and a lot of this is just raw, a guy watching the film and everything. And I know we praise that as being something kind of elite, but it's a very inexact science. And you can tell how inexact it is when you listen to some of these scouts talk. Some scouts think this and some scouts think this. Every year we go over and it's almost a waste of time, because we go over what is his name? Bob McGinn, very plugged in guy. He'll do an article every year, should be coming out relatively soon, going over the different prospects, and it'll just have like 5 different scouts and what they think. You'll have guys on there saying this is a great prospect. He's an early first round pick. It's one of the best I've ever seen. And then you'll have other scouts saying this guy's dog crap. He can't do anything. He's stupid. Like there's no way that these guys are, robots in and of themselves, where if you give them all the same data, they're going to come to the same conclusion because they all do it perfectly. No, they're coming to wildly different conclusions because they all do it very imperfectly. But I think for now, a lot of AI, like I said, would be more about efficiency. There's a lot of data out there. It's probably manually being entered right now. They'll track a guy's play. They have to manually enter it's 3rd and 7 from this time with this much time left on the clock, blah, 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 blah. And then you go back and can manually search stuff. AI can maybe help you sort that, organize that, calculate that, from a 3rd down, how often does this happen, that happen. I would guess they don't use AI a ton right now. Technology, yes. AI, not as much. I think AI will seep its way in, and when it does, it's going to very rapidly transform a lot of things. But appreciate the call, dude. Believe that was your first call in. So technically, even though you're the only caller, you were the first caller because you were a new caller. So congrats on that great honor you have been bestowed. All right, man, I was very excited for this, and I am very excited for this because I knew that when the combine showed up, the data and the news would just be a flowing. I'm struggling now as somebody that's always done a one-team podcast that is now doing a 32-team NFL draft podcast to figure out how in the world, with 32x the amount of information, do you deal with all this? But I'm going to start ripping through some of the latest data. There's a lot. I don't know if it's necessarily a lot more today, but it feels like a lot more today with all the players going to the media. We're probably going to end up skipping most of that because it's just, if you tried to go through every single comment of every single prospect, it would take months just from today. Because there's a lot, I'll just say this. We'll go in no particular order, and we'll see where that leads us. I'll try not to get carried away on too many tangents. I want to start off with this via Kevin Seifert over at ESPN. Vikings exploring all quarterback options for 2026, VP Brzezinski says. Now, obviously, we kind of know what that means. If you're asked about your quarterback situation and you have a quarterback that you believe in, the answer very clearly and very straightforwardly is J.J. McCarthy is our guy. You don't say we're exploring all possibilities. And so I think the immediate thought that I had that you could go down is, could the Vikings be possibly looking at a quarterback? Specifically, you wonder because there is a kind of middle to late first-round prospect with the Vikings picking at 18 in the first round. Is there any chance in the world they take a swing at Ty Simpson? I guess if you phrase it like that, the answer is yes. But the biggest hindrance I think I have to that, there's several, but the number one is they fired their GM and they have not replaced him, and they will not replace him until after the draft. I cannot fathom something dumber than going out and getting your quarterback of the future while you already have a quarterback of the future on your team before you even draft a GM to set the direction of your franchise, which I don't know how you even have a draft right now without a GM, but that's the decision they've made. It just seems like a completely awful situation. The quarterback is way too big of a decision to not grant to, and by the way, what a massive hindrance that's going to be to hiring a GM. If you go out and draft Ty Simpson, and you have Ty Simpson and J.J. McCarthy on your team, and then you try to hire someone, say, here you go, here's your team and all its dysfunction. Oh, and by the way, here's 2 quarterbacks we drafted, and we, don't really want you to draft a third next year, but I guess that's for you to navigate. Like, what a stupid situation to be put in. So I think the obvious direction, even though they say all possibilities, there's not that many possibilities. The obvious direction you go is you bring in let's say a Kirk Cousins type, and you let that situation play out. Does Kirk play and JJ sits, which would be basically the end of JJ McCarthy, in my opinion, unless they do what they've always been doing and blame it on some fake injury or whatever as you try to develop in the background and see what happens. But I think that would signal basically the end, and then you would know in 2027, pending how the quarterback thing shakes out, that's probably the direction you're going to go. The other thing worth mentioning is what I've been talking about for a while now, though, and that is those sort of middle of the draft, middle to late quarterback options that I think are intriguing. And I think there are a lot of teams that should be intrigued by a lot of those, and I think you can add the Vikings to that list. If you're just sort of, because it's such a nonchalant play, there's so many teams that it's like, you don't want to rock the boat, you don't want to upset Rodgers, you don't want to signal that JJ's on the way out, or, you could maybe say, Tennessee with Cam, they're talking as though, he's definitely coming back. which he is, but it's we brought in a new guy to work with Cam Ward and get him squared away, and we're really excited about all that kind of stuff. Atlanta with Penix, the Rams with Stafford, whatever. Maybe Philly if we want to be super controversial. I'm kidding, Philly fans. Don't frickin' throw batteries at me. But again, Nussmeier, Aller, Beck, Cole Payton, Sawyer Robertson, Talon Green, Jalen Daniels, Cade Klubnik, Luke Altmaier, those draftable type guys. But again, especially that sort of mid-round Aller, Beck, Payton, maybe out to Robertson and Talon Green, where you feel like, there might actually be something here. We think it's possible he could be developed into a actual top-tier guy. And the Vikings do not have a 4th-round pick, but they have 2 3rd-round picks. So, it's kind of unfortunate because Aller, Beck, Payton, these guys are right in that 4th-round range. But you could certainly invest one of those 3rd-round picks if you wanted to. If you wanted to take a shot at Drew Aller or Carson Beck or whatever, even if it seems a little early, you certainly could do that. At 161, Talon Green might be sitting there in the 5th round. Uber athletic guy, maybe, you got a really talented play caller. See if you can develop him. See if you can have sort of a Matt LaFleur, Malik Willis situation going on with Talon Green. Or again, if you want to take a really early swing with that 3rd-round compensatory pick at 97, take a shot at Cole Payton or something. Speaking of, by the way, via Adam Schefter, former Penn State, Drew Aller, the quarterback who has recovered from season-ending ankle surgery, will throw this week at the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. All right, why don't we take our first break? We'll come back and keep ripping through a little bit of news. Before we get started, I just want to remind everybody about NFLDraftGrades.com. You can create your own big boards over there completely free. Mock drafts completely free. Group mock drafts are all completely free. And if you have an audience, you can monetize your big boards if you're so inclined. Also, my 2026 big board filled with scouting reports, news and all kinds of things, a lot of which you hear from this podcast and whatnot, I'll save over there. You can subscribe for just $4.99 a month. The link to that is down in the description. Support for my work is obviously greatly appreciated. In other news, defensive lineman Ruben Bain Jr. won't work out at the Combine per McShay. Now, I've mentioned this before. We talked about this yesterday. There's this weird thing where it's like, oh no, he's everything is just horrible if you don't. I get it. I want these guys to participate. A lot of them are not going to. It's been a thing since they changed the format at the Combine. More and more people are choosing not to participate, especially if they're very early 1st-round picks. They feel, what's the point? I know I'm going early. Forget you. You look at the comments, and it's just like they freaking murdered a litter of puppies. Oh, he's never been that good. Top 8 all need to pass on him. He sucks. This is the reason Prime in Colorado never recruited him. He knew he was soft. What a weird thing. He's so overrated. Good, he sucks. He shouldn't go top 13. What a bum. Let the slide begin. Draft stock gonna fall. Like, guys, I'm sorry, but it's really not that big of a deal. Teams do not care. As I just said, they don't want to see them run the fort. They don't care. I honestly don't know why players even do it. Why do it? Teams don't care. Maybe a little bit of some of the other positional drill stuff or whatever, but as long as you're willing to do the interviews and the medicals and you do, who cares? The teams don't care about a lot of this other crap that you do, especially the 40-yard dash. So why do it? Skipping the Combine could impact his draft stock. It's not going to. I understand if you're one of those guys that, you're really, let's call it day 3. You're a day 3 prospect. You're trying to shine. You're trying to prove that I'm better than all this other stuff. I have something that you missed or whatever the case may be. And you're kind of fighting and scrapping for something, but who cares? Again, it sucks for us from an entertainment standpoint, but that's really all it is they're risking their draftability and their draft stock. They're risking an injury for our entertainment. All right, I want to look over at the old rumor mill here. Ultra Football puts a lot of good stuff together. So first of all, and again, I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again as my one draft take right now, but another team we can add to that list of mid-range quarterbacks, Cleveland Browns. Browns GM Andrew Berry told the media he is not opposed to drafting a quarterback in April. Now, that's kind of a nothing statement, Hey, are you opposed to drafting a quarterback? No. But if we're being honest, should they be open to it? I think they absolutely should be open to it. Then later, we got this little nugget. Malik Willis and Ty Simpson are on the Browns' radar via Mary Kay Cabot at Cleveland.com. So, starting to sound a little bit more than just anything's possible kind of an answer. The Rams could draft a developmental quarterback in the first round. I love how we pretend that there's like 9 first-round prospects. In the 2026 NFL Draft via Vincent Bonsignor, New York Post, whoever that is. Via Charlie Campbell, who works over at that site, the Giants are very high on Jeremiah Love, Caleb Downs, and Arvell Reese. Goes on to say it's likely that most teams love these players, but the Giants will most likely have the option between the former 2 prospects at number 5 overall. Talking about Love and Downs. Says Reese should be taken in the top 3, but Love and Downs seem likely to be available at number 5. Given Cam Scadabaugh's presence, Downs makes much more sense. So again, when you just read it, it's like, well, no, duh, everybody does. But if you kind of think through it, if those are the guys that they're in love with, well, Reese isn't probably going to be there. Jeremiah Love doesn't make a ton of sense. Potentially, Caleb Downs could be the pick for the Giants, which I don't think a lot of people are mocking exactly at this point. The Redskins, the Commanders prefer a pass rusher at number 7 via Charlie Campbell. Running back should be an option as well if Jeremiah Love were available, but it seems as though Washington wants someone to help rush the passer. Arvell Reese and David Bailey are likely to be off the board, so Redskins, they wrote, would be looking at someone like Reuben Bain. And then lastly, there's mutual interest between Malik and the Dolphins, Malik Willis, that is, which... there's been, it's kind of I guess you can call it a 2-horse race here. Could be a lot more interested in that, but the rumors have largely been centered around the Dolphins with a little bit popping up about Arizona. Obviously, in terms of the NFL draft, that's going to impact how things, go forward. But you can really tell the state of the quarterback situation in the draft based on the desperation. I just saw recently that teams have been calling Carolina about the availability of Andy Dalton. So when you got teams out there trying to make trades for Andy Dalton, it's getting rough out there. In other news and rumors via Charlie Campbell, he wrote an article, some teams feel no offensive tackle is worthy of the top 10. I mean, this is a pretty drastic departure from what we've been using here as far as the consensus board in regard specifically to Francis Mauigoa and Spencer Fano. Mauigoa right now on the consensus board is sitting at 4. Fano is sitting at 6. Now, this also kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, about the hilarious disparity between different teams and scouts and everything else. Because I guarantee you, this is not a unanimous sentiment. But the fact that some people view this as there's not a single tackle worth taking in the top 10 really goes to show the disparity that you're going to find from team to team, and it's more specifically from scout to scout. Talks a little bit about offensive tackles and why they end up getting pushed up the draft, largely because, number one, they tend to be, according to his data, one of the safer picks compared to other positions, and they also end up, as veterans, becoming more overpaid and more rapidly declining. These are not from my research, but this is the argument he's making. And so as a result, when you have, a high hit rate position that becomes way too expensive later on, you definitely value drafting them. And so that pushes people up a little bit higher. But it says, however, in speaking to team sources at multiple teams, They feel that none of the 2026 draft prospects are true top 10 picks. Many team sources were in agreement that none of the tackles this year were true top 10 talents like Penei Sewell, Joe Alt, or Andrew Thomas. Sources said that Utah's Spencer Fano, Miami's Francis Mauigoa, and Alabama's Caden Proctor could easily go in the top 10 this year, but they have issues that make them feel they're not true top 10 prospects right now. Quote, Fano is not that big, not that long, has flaws and weaknesses, but should be a solid starter, said an NFC assistant general manager. Proctor is an athletic freak. He's very talented, but there are character and weight questions. Mauigoa could be a right tackle, but might end up a guard. Earlier in the fall, we reported how some teams were projecting Proctor outside the top 10 because of his weight issues. Sources felt Proctor was too heavy, and they felt he might lose a lot of weight before the Combine and Pro Day, but then balloon back up and have a hard time keeping the weight off in years to come. Caden Proctor, by the way, is consensus 21. But I did mention, who was it? There were a couple of guys that we talked about recently where they could actually be higher than what people are realizing. In other news, this via Tony Pauline, the New York Jets are officially bargain hunting for quarterbacks, according to league sources. The Jets are learning from last year's high-priced quarterback gamble, and sources indicate the new trade target list looks very different. So, again, this is it really points to the quarterback situation. It also probably signals that a lot of these quarterbacks are going to be drafted a little earlier than expected. The sheer desperation out here. And this has happened before. It seems to ebb and flow between, the league having quite a few quarterbacks and the league not having hardly any good quarterbacks. And when that's the case, it is a frenzy. And it's also been a little bit dry out there looking for premier quarterback prospects. We're not exactly at replacement level. So it's going to get a little silly out there, which is also great for guys, especially guys like Malik Willis. I don't think I saved it, but there was talk about how it used to be. If you want to prove it, cool. We'll give you like $5-6 million to come in here, and we'll see what you can do, compete. Call it 10. I don't know, and just play around and see what happens. $30 million for a guy that's never really done anything. I think Jimmy Garoppolo got a big paycheck in a semi-similar situation, but it's definitely going to work to his advantage and a lot of other guys' advantage to make a little bit of money this year. Anywho, let's take our final break. We got some more Pauline stuff. There's been a couple videos he's put out about some of the things he's hearing, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to comment on something real quick because obviously this NFL Draft podcast is new. I have always been a huge fan of the draft. I've been contemplating putting the YouTube channel back to a draft channel and doing mock drafts and all that stuff, which may happen. I don't know, but I've always kind of I started before I did Packers. I had a YouTube channel for the NFL Draft, which is one of my bigger regrets is not keeping that because it was actually doing very well, and I just didn't want to do all that work anymore. And if I had still kept that going today, it would be a heck of a thing right now. But, you make choices and you live with them. As I'm on, episode 22, 3, something like that, I'm still feeling my way through this. It's a very different kind of a dynamic. And so I think although it's going to be called NFL Draft, I want to sort of broaden the focus just a touch as almost like an NFL off-season podcast. And I guess what I mean by that is I don't want to just be strictly, it has to be within the parameters of the draft. It very much limits you, especially if you're not like a big film person, because film guys have the luxury of just saying stuff. I don't necessarily mean that in a negative way, but in terms of speaking very in depth on their opinions of prospects and all those different things. I can speak to what other people have said about them, but I also think from a passion standpoint, and I've talked about this on the Packernet show, I've always loved the concept, kind of like the idea of being a GM. It's much broader than the draft. It's the idea of team building. And so the primary focus will always remain NFL Draft. There's no doubt about it. But again, I just don't want to restrict myself to Like, why are you talking about this on another NFL draft podcast? Because I enjoy looking at, the Raiders and saying, man, okay, this is where we're at. We're in a bad spot, but we've seen teams do radical turnarounds. What is the play here? And that's a massive NFL draft question, but it goes beyond that. It goes into free agency. It goes into, the contract situation. Again, it's all so intertwined. It's very hard to say we're only going to talk about this and not the other stuff. How can you talk about the draft if you don't understand the age of their certain players, the contract situation of their teams and the individual players? All that goes into team building. So it's not going to be just an NFL podcast broadly, but it's going to be, I guess, we'll call it NFL Draft. It will largely be NFL Draft, but I really, again, just it's easier to do a podcast when you're passionate about something, and I love, again, I'm looking at the PFF thing for the Raiders. It's just up from something we were working on before, I guess. I don't know exactly what, probably the mock draft or something. But I just love looking at it, and obviously I love doing this for the Packers, but the opportunity to do this and to put myself in the shoes of being a Raiders fan or a Raiders GM or whatever the case may be, just for a minute, and say, here's how I would attack this. I freaking love that. Anywho, I just wanted to say that and get it out there just so I'm kind of, again, I'm still kind of working my way through this. I'm trying to settle into something. I'm doing different things or trying different things, and eventually we'll kind of settle into something. But that's kind of the first major thing that I recognize is how much I enjoyed that. And once I started dipping my toe in those waters, I found that I could start rattling off and talking as opposed to like, I don't know, I'm new to this. Like, how do I do this kind of thing? So I think that was kind of a signal. We need to embrace that a little bit. Okay. So a couple different things. So over at Essentially Sports, Tony Pauline, it was actually kind of interesting. I just watched a video on social media where he was talking about his first combine was back in 2021, because I never understood the story of Tony Pauline. Like, how does this random person get to be such an insider or whatever? Well, apparently back in 2001, the combine was not really he said there was no media center. There was not a media event. It was just, you had media people that were around with their notepads and their little, handheld recorders, but they weren't even allowed into the events. They, and he said essentially he would go there, he would see the media people and talk to them. He snuck into the actual combine event. He wasn't allowed, but he would sneak in so that he could get insights and all these different kinds of things. And then they would go, I forget exactly the place, but they would all go to a certain spot. The alcohol would be flowing. Lips would start getting a little bit loose. He would start schmoozing some people, making some friends, making some connections, and getting a lot of intel. And so then, the internet was basically brand new at that point, at least as far as like everybody being on it at that point around 2000. I would say, most Americans had a computer, but kind of just barely. I think we barely just got a computer around that time. I know my grandma had one probably late 90s, but, whatever. So again, that's kind of that period where people were just getting those computers. Internet was relatively new. Nobody knew what the heck they were supposed to do with it. It was dial-up. So he got in at that time. He started publishing these draft insights and things he was hearing and all that. I obviously didn't know of him at the time, but he said once that started happening, the NFL realized they should probably set up a media center and kind of do this formally. And now it's turned into a big, massive event or whatever. But anyways, so that's Pauline. He got in on the ground floor. He got in there, got with the drinks flowing and got all the names and all that. So he's a very well plugged in person, and he's a great resource at this time of year because he can walk into a room and say, hey, I got some questions for you with several guys and get a bunch of answers. So on this episode here from the 24th, he's over at Essentially Sports now. As I said, it's just some random thing. Somebody with money says, I want to start a news sports company, and they throw a bunch of money at some high-level people like Tony Pauline. They make a bunch of money, and then by next year or 2 years, Pauline will be somewhere else when some other rich person decides, I want to start something. Eventually, they'll probably end up on their own little Substack or something, or hopefully over at NFLDraftGrades.com. I got to get these guys over there to create their boards on there. Would be freaking ideal, but probably won't happen. A lot of this is kind of news we've already covered. It's the stuff that everybody's talking about, so everybody's kind of regurgitating the things that everybody's talking about. So at this point, kind of trying to comb through and find some different details. You know, we know about Tua unlikely to come back. We know that Fernando Mendoza is not going to the Dolphins. And so, you know, he mentions even that Ty Simpson is a little bit of a reach for the Dolphins, which, you know, it wasn't long ago that 11 wouldn't have been a massive reach. But at this point, it seems to be kind of a consensus, and we'll see how he does at the Combine. He's one of those guys that, you know, there's some questions that could possibly be answered positively. We'll get to that in a minute. But it kind of leaves him in no man's land. And so Tony Pauline lays out essentially the thing that I've been saying. They're another team that is probably going to be hunting in that day 3 sleeper territory. He highlights Taylon Green or Drew Aller as potential guys. I will say I'm a little surprised he called him a day 3 sleeper. I think he's in the Aller at least is in the day 2 conversation, I would think. Again, we already talked about Malik Willis, but I'll just mention he talks about it as the conversation has reached Malik Willis hysteria, which again, I'm very happy for Malik and what that's going to do for him, and I really hope he has a lot of success. It's going to make me very sad as a Packer fan, but it has really reached a fever pitch, and rightly so. I mean, he has been an unbelievably good. I think even Tony Pauline undersells him, says that they're kind of overvaluing some highlights. It's really not highlights. Look at the consistency on a throw-to-throw basis. I mean, the shocking level of elite ball placement in terms of the actual rate is exceedingly high. He goes on to talk about prospects with the most to gain. Now, I already did this myself, but here is essentially what Tony Pauline said. First off, as I said, Ty Simpson. Now, what he said is that he needs to show accuracy and timing, and that the film shows he stares down targets too long. Now, that's going to be very difficult to do at the Combine. Accuracy, not as much, although accuracy at the Combine compared to in a game is probably going to be a little different. And it's also going to be one of those things, we've seen so much film on this guy, I don't know how much, you know, him in shorts throwing to a guy is going to really change our position on that. The staring down targets thing and timing thing is going to be very difficult because game speed and all that stuff, it changes everything. So I don't know. I don't know how much I believe that Ty Simpson can move the needle with teams as opposed to with the media. These guys can, again, massive jumps can be made to the media, to fans, to all that kind of stuff compared to, and I don't necessarily mean that negatively, we don't watch as much film as teams do. So this is a higher percentage of our total understanding of these prospects at the Combine. So it should, unless we're doing the level of research that teams are doing, which nobody is, the Combine should impact the way we view these guys. Talks about Garrett Nussmeier. He has to prove he has the arm strength to drive the ball downfield, not just timing throws. That's always been kind of the knock on Nussmeier. And it's also kind of, he's like the anti-NFL quarterback, at least today's NFL. Today's NFL, everybody's looking for traits. Everybody's looking for guys that can, you know, they got a cannon arm, they've got they you know, elite speed, and Nussmeier is just the prototypical, like, he's a good quarterback, but he's not super strong, he's not super tall, he's not super fast, he's not, you know, there's no box he checks in the exceptional category. At least in terms of his athleticism, his, you know, the physical nature of his makeup. So I think a lot of what you're going to have to see from him, everybody knows he doesn't have a cannon arm. That's a guarantee. But it's kind of like when somebody runs a 40 time. I know you're not going to run in the 4.3s. I need to make sure you don't run in the 4.7s. We're checking the lower limits for Nussmeier, and as long as you can show, like, just let's see you uncork a 60-yard pass. If you can get it there with all your might, how about a 50? Can we do 50? Can we do 55? Like, what is the absolute bottom limit that you can throw a football? Akeem Mesidor, defensive tackle out of Miami at 6'2", 270, has to post elite athletic numbers to prove his versatility. You know, Mesidor is one of those classic tweeners, or I guess I should say we're trying to decide, is he a tweener or is he a chess piece? Is he one of those guys that can do multiple things, or is he one of those guys that really can't do any of them well enough? You know, 6'2", 270 is like a short, big dude. You know what I mean? But it's also a very small defensive tackle. So if I'm going to put you on the end, you're going to have to put up some freakish numbers. You're going to have to be able to move that 270. But again, it's also a problem because you're only 6'2", which means you're not going to have the super long arms, so it's going to be really, really difficult to put you there. We'd like a guy that's like 6'5". You're like 3 inches shy of what I would prefer. So, and that's the problem too. If you're 6'2", we'd like you to be like one of those 245 guys. That way it's like, okay, well, physically you're just going to get engulfed. But if you can beat guys with speed, then maybe there's something there. At 270, what the heck are you going to do? But again, you're going to have to gain at least 20 pounds if we're going to kick you into the inside. So, I would guess most are viewing him as a tweener, which is obviously a massive negative. But this is, again, where you could potentially answer some questions, especially in the lateral agility stuff, short shuttle 3-cone. Do you have that twitch and explosion to win on the inside and beat guys off the snap and everything? There's some premier pass rushers that can do that kind of stuff. Do you have that explosion off the edge to knock people back? Do you have the speed to get around them? Do you have the bend to get around them? So these are all the things we got to get a little closer look at. Pauline said, his film is great. The NFL is a measurable first league. If he runs a 4.8 40-yard dash, he's just a small defensive end. If he runs a 4.6, he becomes a versatile weapon that defensive coordinators will fight for in the late first or early second round. So that'll be a fun one to keep an eye on. Fourth, he mentions Aiden Fisher, linebacker out of Indiana. Says he has to run in the low 4.6s if he wants to secure a day 2 grade. I think a lot of people are concerned that he's 6'1", 231, a little bit undersized for a true Mike linebacker, and the thought is we really can't add more mass to him. He's kind of tapped out. And so if we're going to use him as kind of an undersized sideline to sideline guy instead, then he needs to be in that 4.6 range. If he's a 4.7 to 4.8 type of guy, then you're looking at more of a 2-down sort of a linebacker. So there's going to be questions about his limitations. However, he's also seen as a very high floor prospect. He was the heart of the Indiana team that won the national championship. Scouts call him a green dot prospect. But again, he has to show that he can kind of just check the appropriate boxes, I guess. And then finally, he brought up Emmanuel McNeil Warren, the DB out of Toledo. So this one kind of circles back a little ways. Emmanuel McNeil Warren decided to pull out of the Senior Bowl. And there was a lot of speculation that he was afraid of being exposed in some of these drills, being a smaller school guy out of Toledo and whatnot. And so that was seen as a little bit of a red flag in terms of like, what's going on? Why would you not do that? And so they've already kind of flagged him. We'll see if he decides to run. I don't know if that's been declared yet or not. If he says he's not going to run because speed seems to be the issue, apparently there's decent-looking game speed out there, but there's a question about whether or not he has the actual true top-end speed. And again, you would think that the tape exists out there, but there's always going to be that question of, okay, in this extreme example, you're deep middle field safety and you got to trigger downhill and run as fast as you can. I just got to know what is your upper limit on that. And presumably there's some kind of a, maybe help fill out the remainder of their speed profile on a guy. What is that true top-end speed? I don't really know, but the point is if he doesn't run, they're going to assume he's a 4.6 guy, 4.6 plus, and he's probably not going to be seen as a deep middle field safety, which could cause problems because he's a potential first-round pick. He's really one of those guys that just needs to show up and check the boxes and demonstrate, I am the guy that you thought I was. And if he does that, he's a potential first-round pick. He could be in that conversation of a late first-round guy. If he doesn't, this is one, unlike some of the other, like I said, early first-round guys, this is one of those that could actually hurt him in terms of not a massive drop, but it's certainly it's a massive difference between being a first-round pick and a second-round pick, and he's teetering on that line. And if he were to forfeit these opportunities, there's a good chance he's forfeiting his opportunity to be a first-round pick. However, he also would probably realize that all he's going to do is confirm the red flags, and he would rather let them just assume it and possibly leave the opportunity for some to speculate that maybe, we'll just trust the tape that he looks fast and all that and worry about this, as being a non-issue. But it will more or less confirm that that's why he doesn't want to run. He also, this is another, like every year we go through some of these stories, and it's kind of fun to relive them, so I probably will go through them every single time, but I think we'll probably save that maybe a little bit for tomorrow since we have a full draft podcast to kind of go through some of this, but he kind of goes over some of the stories that are, considered funny stories. It's a little out there, but some of the, for example, questions that prospects will get by teams and some of the crazy stuff, people screaming in guys' faces or just asking really inappropriate questions or whatever the case may be. I don't know. It kind of further solidifies my belief that although I have massive respect for these organizations and the way they go about doing things, sometimes you hear things and just go, these are just a group of football guys who, I think they know a lot less than than a lot of people, themselves included, would assume. So we'll maybe relive a little bit of that tomorrow. But again, the news is coming in kind of fast and furious, and we got these events kicking off here very, very soon. So I don't know if we'll exactly have the time, but we'll put it in our back pocket for another time. The only other real note from this video, there's a second video, but I guess we just won't get to it today because we're kind of dragging on here, is what, again, we've already kind of talked about, and that is on paper, the 2026 class is seen as sort of a mediocre class, but that label primarily means there isn't that sort of generational talent, which I am fine with. In fact, I kind of get annoyed sometimes the way that people talk about the NFL draft, if I'm being completely honest. I mentioned before, the hyperfixation on the first round can get to be very annoying. I still remember, and this was several years ago. I think it was one of the first years that the Draft Network opened up, which was awesome. It was very exciting because it was, there's not a lot of just raw draft content out there. Real knowledgeable people, whatever. I listened to their podcast like every day. It was great. But I remember they were belly aching about what a terrible class it was, what a terrible draft. It was so boring. And the only thing that meant, the only thing that was wrong with the class, I think, is that they were really weak in quarterbacks and wide receivers. And the over-obsession that everybody has, it's like a handicap. Like, I need these elite quarterbacks so I could just gush over the quarterbacks 24/7 and these wide receivers. They just care about, like, the flashy, fun prospects and only the guys in, like, the top 15. Like, guys, we can't talk about this for a year, man. And this happens live during the coverage as well. The coverage of the first round is massive. By the second half of the first round, half the time we're still talking about some of the guys earlier on. We're still talking about the Fernando Mendozas and how that's going to work for the Raiders. And then by the time we get into day two, we're kind of doing that more so, where we're still talking about the big prospects, but we're still kind of announcing each pick. And by day three, they're not even hardly announcing any of the picks anymore. They're still talking about Fernando Mendoza or Shedeur Sanders or whatever topic they feel like getting stuck on, the ones that they find the most entertaining. And I would just get pissed. Like, bro, the Packers just picked somebody. They just picked somebody. And you didn't even mention it. What is wrong with you? But it's just kind of like, I just don't care anymore. And I think if there's one thing that I would love to change, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think would be great to change as far as the NFL draft. There's a lot of stuff that could change. But to try to expand, and I understand it's very difficult to know some of the later prospects, and so it's easier to just focus on some of the earlier prospects. And so for most of the fan bases, you get to know that first round, and you kind of just don't care as much beyond that. I wish we could get to a point where all 3 days were just as exciting as the first day. And it'll never get there entirely, but the drop-off is entirely too drastic, way too drastic. That first-round pick happens, and if that was a good pick, then your franchise is saved. If it was a bad pick, this whole draft is ruined. By the second round, it's just kind of, it's like, maybe they'll be good, but, it's much less. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round, we don't even care. These guys are not going to be any good. Nobody, like, what, we have to get past that. And that's, again, where I get annoyed with comments like this. It's a bad draft class. Really? Why is it bad? Well, it doesn't have, like, the top guys. You mean like if we stacked like a Myles Garrett and, frickin' Saquon or something in this draft class, then all of a sudden it becomes a good class. Out of like 300 prospects, we're going to judge all 300 guys based on how many of the top elite guys there are, whether it's like 5 or 9 or 2 or 7. That's what makes up our thought on the entire class. That's such a shallow and stupid opinion of a draft class. There needs to be a deeper, and I know that there is, but I hate to see mediocre class and then elaborated on where it says lacks generational talent. Okay, dude, great. Guess what? You know how many teams never get the generational talent? Yes, I'm talking about the Packers as one of those things. But how many other teams just don't get top 5 picks and don't get generational talent? If we're just going to talk about generational talent, then 60% of the league is almost never going to be talked about or participate in the draft. Their fan bases never get talked to. We spend all our time talking about the Jets picks and the Browns picks and all the bad teams and all the elite picks that they get, and it's like their season. Screw that. There's 32 teams that are looking to transform the future. And look how many have. You look at the Seattle Seahawks, and we talk about how, the first time Schneider went to the Super Bowl, it was just a couple draft classes and some free agency work too, but it was just like 2 draft classes that built that entire dynasty. And then it died off and the team sucked for a while. And then they had like 1 to 2 really good draft classes again. And it put Witherspoon and Njigba on that team. And again, a free agent acquisition of a quarterback. And just after bad years, all of a sudden it's like hit, Super Bowl. Like, holy crap. New England, very similar from zero to hero type stuff. And it doesn't just have to be the generational talent top 5 guys. If we want to spend more time on them than everybody else, of course, that makes sense. But, bro, we can't talk about Mendoza and Arvell Reese 24/7. We talk about one running back over and over again. It's not I get it's not a strong running back class. So what? Jeremiah Love is the only running back that anybody really talks about. Do you know who Emmett Johnson is? On the consensus big board right now, Emmett Johnson is the 3rd highest ranked running back. 3rd. Do you know how many times I've gone on social media or listened to something and they're talking about Emmett Johnson? I would say roughly 0 times. I don't think there's been a single day that I haven't seen talks about Jeremiah Love. And by the way, and I know we're way too late to the party, this is probably more of a next year thing, but in terms of setting goals, having a better understanding, if we knew, for example, I don't know, let's pick linebacker. If we knew Eric Gentry, linebacker out of USC, as well as we knew Jake Galday, linebacker out of Cincinnati, do you know how much more enjoyable the combine would be? There are guys, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of guys that are super hardcore. What I'm saying is it would be great for our audiences and for the media and for everybody else to kind of come along with that. And the reality is the only way that happens is for the NFL draft to be a year-round event. Because if you just pop in the last month, you can't really know much more than the first round, maybe a little bit of the second round. But as you're watching the combine, you're looking and it's like, I don't know this guy, I don't know this guy, I don't know this guy, I don't know. Oh, there's one. Yeah, he's supposed to be fast. Oh, look, he was fast. Cool. Anyways, I don't know this one. And Daniel Jeremiah is great because he doesn't do that. You'll if you're one of those guys that just knows like 2 people, he doesn't put the emphasis on that guy any more than anybody else. So it's like, it just sounds like he's some random guy. Like, you know who that was, Daniel Jeremiah? Yeah, and he also knows, he knows who Arvell Reese is. He also knows who, Red Murdoch is or Jack Kelly out of BYU. He's a psycho. He knows these guys inside and out. But that's the, and you can hear the, it's not a very lively event when you're just listening to it. It's almost like watching golf, Here comes Harold Perkins. He's going to be running his 40 now. And there he goes, folks. 10 yards, 20 yards. Ooh, that was fast. What did he get? It's not quite that bad, but it's kind of like that. But you can hear the excitement from Daniel Jeremiah talking about, he'll talk about somebody you've never heard, Taurine York, linebacker out of Texas A&M, who's at 129. Everybody should know who that is when you're barely outside the top 100. He'll talk about, oh, here comes Taurine York. This is a great kid out of, South Carolina, did all these things. And, and he great kid, talked with his parents the other day. They raised him right. He'll go through the whole thing. He knows all these guys. And so you can tell hardcore draft people because they love the combine, because these are guys they've been watching for a long time from afar. And now you get to see them up close, in person, somewhat verifying or testing your priors and your thoughts on these guys. It's very enjoyable. But the level of enjoyment you're going to have for events like the Combine and the NFL Draft are directly correlated to how much knowledge you have about the event. And that goes for the draft too. If you know 10 prospects and you draft at 27, it's going to be like me watching the draft when I was, 10 years old at my grandma's house, just watching the names scroll on the bottom of the screen to see who the Packers picked, just waiting for that pick, waiting. And then they'd pick somebody and I'd get excited, but I don't know who that is. Never heard of that person in my life. There's no draft coverage. If there was, I wouldn't know what channel. I'd have to go get the TV guide and see what channel it's on. I don't freaking know, but it wasn't in there. Anywho, that's my rant for the day. That's my my pleading out there for everybody is for all of us to try to find more joy in this by just being more plugged into this. It's overwhelming, especially at the beginning, to be like, dude, I don't know any of these people. I don't know these names. I don't know what to do. Just get started. Just plug away. Again, as far as this podcast is concerned, we're getting a very late start, basically at the start of the draft. Next year will be a little bit easier, but we're going to hit the ground running and get as much of this done as we can. Anywho, I'm out of here. I'll talk to y'all later. Have a good one.